Brandon Davies?
Brandon Davies.
No, that might not be him. I don't know if that's him.
Brandon Davies, it is him.
You're sure it's him? You sure that is the man who had premarital sex?
Yeah, I'm pretty
Then
positive. Do I have evidence? No. Do I want evidence? No. Would it be appropriate to have evidence? No. But it was Brandon Davies. I'm 99% sure. Yeah. So the small faction of listeners who have children and tend to want to listen to this podcast, our deepest apologies for.
I apologize.
Go subscribe to the YouTube channel. While you're there, smash the like button like you're Brandon Davies. He would. My man sacrificed a basketball season, a possible trip to the Final Four just to smash. If he's going to smash and put his basketball career at risk, what is your excuse? You don't have one. You're not going to get suspended from anything for smashing. So go smash the like button.
Oh yeah, we're talking about it. What's going on, everybody? It's Cole here, and today we're talking about Brandon Davies. Yes, the notorious BYU basketball player that cost his team potentially a national championship run. Now, obviously, you are familiar with who was in that intro. That was the Eye on College Basketball podcast with Matt Norlander and specifically Gary Parrish. Gary Parrish brought to light Brandon Davies in the national media after people had kind of forgotten about his story. I think it was about 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. And, you know, if you listen to the Eye on College Basketball podcast, they're certainly unique, and especially Gary. Gary has a weird sense of humor, if you will say. And looking back, I found this tweet from Gary Parrish in 2011. All the way back then, he was a huge proponent of premarital sex. So again, this guy's humor, it's really hilarious. Maybe some of you just don't get it, but for me, I love Gary Parrish. I love his sense of humor. I think he's hilarious. He's uncomfortably funny, which is kind of my sense of humor. And he honestly talks about premarital sex in every single podcast.
What's the premarital sex capital of the United States? That's what we got to know.
Probably Mississippi. We lead the country in everything that's bad, except premarital sex is not bad. You're not going to trick me.
Florida's got to be involved.
I think a lot of people go to Florida to have premarital sex, but I don't know if that makes Florida the capital of premarital sex.
You have to be a resident?
I think you have to be a resident.
People are traveling to do it.
You go to Florida to go to Disney World and have premarital sex.
I was thinking more like Fort Lauderdale, Miami, steal away to the Keys, but you're going Disney World. All right.
I feel like I had premarital sex in all those places you just named.
They shout out Brandon Davies in every single podcast since then. I'm pretty sure they still do that. So they kind of brought this guy back to light. And Brandon Davies played for BYU, 2010, 11, 12 range. And he was on that Jimmer Fredette team. Now, if you remember that Jimmer Fredette team, which I'll get into in this video, I mean, they were unreal. They were super fun to watch. They were a great offensive team. But in this video, I want to talk about how Brandon Davies was suspended from that season, the 2011 season, and it potentially cost BYU a national championship, which is what the Eye on College Basketball podcast always mentions. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about that because it really is one of the crazier stories, and I just couldn't find anything about it. And I looked up Brandon Davies, and I couldn't find a single video that wasn't from 2011 on this topic. Nobody's made anything as of recently about Brandon Davies. I mean, I kept searching, and I could not find a single thing. And I also looked at Flimlo's channel just to double check, and he hasn't made anything about it either. So here we are with Brandon Davies and this incredible story. So let's get into the story of Brandon Davies and BYU, because it really is just a crazy story. It's definitely not like a controversial story. It's not something that maybe even you guys even know about. This did happen like over a decade ago. Again, there just isn't any YouTube videos about it. So I decided to make my own video inspired by the Eye on College Basketball podcast constantly talking about premarital sex, which Gary Parrish, my God, the guy he's something else. All right, let's start this video off by going back in time. The year is 2010. BYU is a really good basketball team. Jimmer Fredette, he was a very notable name within the sport because the Cougars made the NCAA tournament. They had one of the best offenses in the country. They were highly ranked analytically. On KenPom, I think they were ranked in like the top 10. So BYU was a very good basketball team. They went on to the NCAA tournament. They were just a 7 seed though, but in the NCAA tournament, they beat Florida in double overtime. And then they lost to a Kansas State team that was pretty good. I'm pretty sure they lost to Butler and I think the Elite Eight. So their season ended there, but they were going to bring this team back and Jimmer was going to come back next season. And they obviously were really good offensively, but 2011 was when they caught fire, and this was the great BYU basketball team. Jimmer Fredette, I mean, he was absolutely unreal in 2011. If you go back in time, I mean, I don't know if all of you have lived the Jimmer Fredette era. Jimmer Fredette truly had one of the best college basketball seasons we've ever seen. He caught fire. It was a complete movement. We don't really see movements in college basketball anymore. It was a Zion-esque type of season that he had. I mean, everybody was talking about Jimmer Fredette. You could literally have a conversation with anybody in America, and they probably remember the name Jimmer Fredette, especially during that time period. BYU BYU, they raced off to a 27-2 record that season, with wins over notably Arizona, who went on to the Elite Eight with Derek Williams. They also had 2 wins over San Diego State, and this was a great San Diego State team, the best they've ever had. With Kawhi Leonard, they ended up getting a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, and Jimmer Fredette was having one of the greatest college basketball seasons we've ever seen. They were projected to get a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. They had climbed all the way up to the number 3 ranking in the sport. However, we have the Brandon Davies suspension.
I wonder if they'll get a number 1 seed. I don't think they can. I think the committee will penalize them, even though they claim they won't.
I don't think they will unless they start losing games. And we
I hate
agree.
saying this. I want to see BYU whole.
We agree. It significantly hampers their chances of winning
moving
the
deep. Yes, it does, Tony.
I think right now it would slot him in as a number 1 seed, but now without Davies, I think it could cost them a number 1 seed. The selection committee certainly will look at that, and I don't think they'll be as effective. Where I thought they would run the table now going into the NCAA tournament, I think now it could be a little danger time, especially when they get into that tournament in the league conference tournament. So again, losing a play like Davies, very, very important at this time of the year.
And it was on March 4th of 2011 when Brandon Davies was suspended for violating the team's honor code. And not just the team, it was actually the university. And he was suspended because he apparently had premarital sex with his girlfriend. Now, obviously, it was consensual and it was with his girlfriend. So why would this be an issue? Well, he obviously signed a contract with BYU, which was their honor code. BYU's honor code states that all students are forbidden from having premarital sex. They also must abstain from other traditional college activities like drinking alcohol, drinking coffee, and smoking in an attempt to live what they say a chaste and virtuous life. So he broke their honor code, and this wasn't an NCAA violation. Like, the NCAA didn't necessarily have to do anything about this, but to BYU, this meant a lot to them. Students get suspended or even expelled from the university all the time for stuff like this, and they suspended him for this for the rest of the season. But the crazy part about this story was actually the national news that it gained.
Brandon's a really good athlete that can run, he can block and change shots, he rebounds pretty well, and he did a really good job of finishing plays. So to have a finisher there, I think anytime you're gonna be successful in the NCAA tournament, you've got to be able to score in the post and guard in the post. So I think it's a huge blow to BYU and their chances in the NCAA tournament. But Brandon Davies was one of their top 3 players, and I think they're second key because he was their number 1 inside presence.
Looking back, I was trying to find clips on this situation, and which I've showed you a couple so far. But also, what I found crazy was that the school's athletic director and the school's president went on the Today Show, went on CBS in the morning.
Do you at any point think, though, that maybe he deserves a second chance? Because I know honesty is also a part of your honor code, and he didn't lie about it, he didn't deny it, and he was quick to cop to it once you presented this to him.
That's correct. Brandon was very forthright in his discussion about the incident, and we feel that he has a second chance. We are doing all that we can to keep him in the fold and to make sure that he has access to the team and that he'll be able to come and achieve the dreams that he had before. And he's excited to see the future and to take care of business, to be able to do the things necessary to get back in full teamwork.
And they just openly suspended him for this, and a lot of people gave them credit because, again, we see situations all the time in college athletics where people are given a slap on the wrist, things aren't taken seriously, guys aren't suspended properly, especially those from a good team or players, good athletes. But Brandon was suspended for the rest of the season, and Jimmer Fredette said that he told the team that he was sorry and let the team down, but Fredette said that we told him it's okay. Sometimes in life we make mistakes, we've got to play through it. And Dave Rose, their head coach, said that everybody comes to BYU, every student, if they're an athlete or not an athlete, they make a commitment and they come here. And a lot of people try to judge it if it's right or wrong, but it's a commitment they make. And it's not about being right or wrong, it's about that commitment. I mean, this, again, was a team that was on the verge of potentially competing for a national championship or having an all-time season, and they just completely suspended a guy for breaking honor code, and not a criminal offense, not something that harmed anybody. NCAA, and Brandon Davies openly admitted to what he did, and they just completely suspended him for it. And Brandon had started 26 of their 29 games. He had averaged 11 points, led the team in rebounds. He was having a very crucial sophomore season for this team, and he gave them their length and size down low that helped Jimmer Fredette have a National Player of the Year worthy season. Now, the season was not over for them, despite this suspension happening in March, which is what makes the story so crazy because they suspended him right before the NCAA tournament. But BYU, they still made their conference tournament in the Mountain West, and not only did they make it there, they made it all the way to the title game. However, they lost to San Diego State, and Kawhi Leonard finally got the best of them after beating them 2 times in the regular season. So that's where their regular season stopped. But the NCAA tournament was still going to happen, obviously. And BYU, despite, having the aspirations of getting a 1, maybe a 2 seed, BYU was given a 3 seed during the NCAA tournament in the same region that Butler would eventually win as an 8 seed. And that's honestly what makes this Brandon Davies suspension so critical, is because BYU still was good during the NCAA tournament. Their first game, they played Wofford, and they ended up beating them by 8. And then in the round of 32, they played Gonzaga and beat them by 22 points. And they were starting to roll. But in the Sweet 16, they would draw a rematch versus Florida, a team that they played last season in the NCAA tournament. And despite a tough battle, went to overtime, the Cougars lost by 9 points, and their season would end there. But it's what could have happened, because let's say they did have Brandon Davies versus Florida. That Florida team lost in the next round to Butler, and Butler went on to play VCU in the Final Four, a VCU team that was an 11 seed. Very well could have missed the NCAA tournament because they were in the first 4. And then Butler lost to UConn in the national championship game, and UConn was a 3 seed just like BYU. Things could have definitely shaped out very differently if Brandon had not been lost. I mean, this was a BYU team that just put up a lot of points. Very good. Maybe that suspension kind of cost them their season because of how late it came into the season. They had to, kind of find a new identity. They didn't really have a post presence at all without Brandon. And this wasn't an injury that happened. This was a guy that just had premarital sex, like lots of student athletes have every single season. It's not like he broke a law or anything. And that's why I think Gary Parrish honestly jokes about the entire situation on their podcast, is because truly, theoretically, could have gone on to the national championship game if they had a post presence, could have gone further in the NCAA tournament, they could have made the Final Four if Brandon Davies was there. This wasn't an injury that happened. It's not like they had bad luck. I mean, he didn't even break a law, but he was suspended for the rest of the season, and BYU's hopes, despite Jimmer winning National Player of the Year, their hopes of making a Final Four or winning a national championship were ultimately lost because they lost basically their best rebounder and their best post presence. That's what makes the story crazy. I feel like not a lot of people even know about this story, but honestly, what's really crazy about all of this is Brandon Davies, he didn't graduate. He was only a sophomore. He also didn't quit playing basketball. He didn't transfer. He literally came back the next season to BYU. He came back to school at BYU despite all of this happening, despite all of the national press that it got, despite, the embarrassment from this entire situation. He literally came back to school the next season. And not only that, as a junior, he was named to the All West Coast Conference team because BYU had finally switched conferences, and he was literally their best player, and they went on to make the NCAA tournament again the next season. And then his senior season in 2013, they missed the NCAA tournament, but again, Brandon Davies as a senior, he served as the team captain. He averaged 17 points and 8 rebounds. So that's what makes this story really crazy, is because Brandon Davies came back to this school, try to hide from this. He didn't try to quit playing basketball. He didn't just live his life in embarrassment. He still wanted to keep playing basketball for this team and under Dave Rose and under the administration that suspended him from potentially a national championship team. He came back, he put it past him, and he kept improving as a player that ended up, being the best player on this team his final 2 seasons after Jimmer left. So you have to give Brandon Davies a lot of props for that, because a lot of guys would run from this. A lot of guys would maybe quit playing basketball. Brandon didn't live with this embarrassment. He moved past this, and this is just a really embarrassing story that's frustrating to look at, especially if you're a fan. The team suspended him. It's not like the NCAA suspended him. And this all really could have been preventable. And that's something that I completely forgot about. I completely forgot about him coming back to this team and honestly being their best player on an NCAA tournament team the next season. He served as the team's captain. So you have to give him a lot of props for this. And I think that's actually what makes this story pretty good, is because there was something positive that came out of all of this, which was Brandon Davies became a better person because of all of this. What's kind of interesting about this this whole topic is that Brandon Davies, I looked up what he was up to. He's playing overseas basketball. You know, he has a child now. He's married. I'm sure he wants to move on from this. You know, Gary Parrish had to bring this back into the light, and I honestly couldn't help myself but to make a video about it. Now, I don't think Brandon, he's obviously not a bad dude at all. I mean, he made an honest mistake against his school's policy, and I'm sure that he thinks about it. Seems like he moved on, and obviously he kept playing at BYU. It's not even really something I think he should be ashamed about. It just kind of is what it is. Like, this is really a story where you could say it is what it is, because you got to give the man props. Obviously, might have risked it all for his season, but it's not like he did something bad to begin with. So that's the story of Brandon Davies, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. This was certainly an interesting video. This is my second video back, and yeah, we got more stories to talk about, and I really hope you enjoyed this. Maybe go back and watch some of those BYU games, because Jimmer Fredette, my friends, I mean, he was really something else in that season. I mean, that 2011 season was a lot like this past season, especially that Final Four. I mean, they both were in Houston, obviously, but you just saw a lot of parity, some weird outcomes. You know, the national championship had Butler again. 2011 season means a lot to me, and that Jimmer team was pretty awesome to watch. So that's the story of Brandon Davies and BYU. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.